The Life of Flat Thomas Green Clemson, Before, During, and After the Reconstruction Era by James R. Neely. Thomas Green Clemson was born on July 1st in 1807 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was born into a wealthy family. Sadly, his father died when he was 6. During this time period, Philadelphia had a relatively large amount of free blacks, but in comparison, there is believed to have been around 4 million slaves in the South. The South claimed to need these slaves for manual labor, such as working on the plantations to plant, tend, and pick cotton. The Civil War had not yet begun. It would start about 54 years later. However, tensions were rising between the North and the South because as the country grew, the newly added states had to declare their intentions regarding slavery, causing much disagreement in Congress. As I mentioned, his father died when he was only 6 years old. He was left with an inheritance of $100,000. $100,000 in 1800 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $2.2 million today. Wow, that's a lot of money. He was very well educated and also fluent in French, German, and English. He studied science and mathematics at the American Literary, Scientific, and Military Academy in Norwich, Vermont. He journeyed to France to study at the Sorbonne Royal College of Paris. He also graduated from the Royal School of Mines with a degree in mining engineering. He needed to travel to Europe for his college years as they offered more advanced classes than the U.S., which propelled his thinking about creating his own college for higher learning. He was tall. Very tall. 6'6". He was not much of a social guy, but did end up getting married. He married Anna Maria Calhoun, the daughter of John C. Calhoun, former Vice President of the U.S. and South Carolina State Senator. They moved to Fort Hill, South Carolina, present-day Clemson, to live on her family's plantation. On this plantation, there were about 70 slaves. In the detailed letters written by Clemson to Calhoun, the slaves don't appear to have been mistreated, and in fact sounded like they were treated quite well, with 4-day holidays and the use of the kitchen and dancing all night. His father-in-law supported the institution of slavery. It is unclear to me if Clemson became a big supporter of slavery or just wanted to please his father-in-law. While managing the Fort Hill plantation, Clemson became fascinated about plants and farming, and all the best techniques to do so. He incorporated his love of science into his plantation owner/overseer lifestyle. He even ended up purchasing his own 1,000-acre plantation and 37 slaves. My experience tells me that the institution of slavery is at all times good for the Negro. No laborers in the world are so well off. At times good for the master, but very bad for the state. It sounds like he became accustomed to having slaves, happy to learn that he appears to have treated them fairly well. We now know that this is very clearly wrong. I can't stress this point enough. I am not pro-slavery, just trying to retell his story and hoping that I'm doing it justice. But at the time, he thought he was doing them a favor. Clemson liked art and music very much. In 1843, Clemson bought himself a 1,000-acre plantation. He also bought 37 slaves for $6,000. Because his bankrupt brother-in-law desperately needed some money. And from 1844 to 1851, we can't forget to mention that he was a diplomat in Europe. He was the highest-ranking American ambassador to Belgium. His father-in-law sort of pulled a few strings to send Clemson back to Europe, which he loved. When he returned, he sold his massive plantation for a whopping $38,000, or in today's money, $1.3 million. Interestingly enough, he had requirements that even though he was selling his slaves, they would need to be sold as families. The Clemsons would move to Washington, D.C., where they would live in a home without slaves, and actually permitted an African-American boy born on their plantation in Fort Hill to live with them. In 1860, he became Superintendent of Agricultural Affairs in the U.S. Department of the Interior. He got the Morrill Land Grant passed, which, quote-unquote, set aside federal lands to create colleges to benefit the agricultural and mechanical arts. In each state, it took 2 years to be put in effect. In 1861 to 1865, he enlisted and served in the Confederate Army in Orr's Rifles 1st South Carolina Regiment. At age 54, he wasn't killed or captured, and after the end of the war, he received a pardon from the President Andrew Johnson in 1866. He needed this pardon because he was a Confederate soldier. The Reconstruction era. This period was difficult for Clemson, as it was for many. He had given up his successful political career to enlist as a Confederate soldier. This wasn't overly surprising, seeing as he was a Southern plantation owner and overseer. He took Fort Hill under his leadership once again and began hiring freed people until his retirement in 1872. Both of the Clemsons were in agreement that a college would be built on their Fort Hill land, although not specifically called out in Anna Marie's will. In the years following her death, 1875 to 1888, Clemson spent the remainder of his life establishing a higher educational facility. He had hoped that his Morrill land grant would provide agricultural schooling, but sadly, the South Carolina government did not see eye to eye with him. So, not going to give up on their dream, he decided to establish a private college in South Carolina, as a private school would have more freedom to do what it wanted, and wanted it to be named Clemson Agricultural School. He died on April 6, 1888 of pneumonia. Cue Clemson College, founded in 1889 and its door opened in 1893. The end.